It is June 1935, Akron, Ohio. A warm sun hangs over the sleepy streets, casting long shadows across sidewalks lined with sycamores and worn-out porches. The air smells of fresh-cut grass and coal smoke, the scent of working-class America in the throes of a Great Depression summer. In a modest house on Ardmore Avenue, a woman adjusts the net curtains of her sitting room window. They flutter in the light breeze, whispering softly against the wooden frame. A radio hums faintly from another room, playing swing music beneath the distant chirp of cicadas. Inside, the air is heavy with anticipation, not heat. Two men are about to meet, strangers. One from New York, the other a local doctor. Both are alcoholics. Both have tried everything to stop. Both have failed. One of them, the visitor, is dangerously close to drinking again. He's travelled here on a business venture that has collapsed. Broke, despairing, holed up in a hotel, and clinging to sobriety by the tips of his fingers, he paces the lobby, searching for a bar, but instead finds a church directory on the wall. He makes a phone call, not for a drink, but for help. A local woman, a member of the Oxford group, a Christian spiritual fellowship, picks up. She doesn't hesitate. She knows someone who needs to hear this man's story, a doctor who drinks badly, and who might just be ready to listen. And so, in this quiet house on a quiet street, one man talks while the other listens. For hours, the visitor doesn't offer lectures, medical advice, or tough love, just his story. His powerlessness over alcohol, his shame, his wrecked career, his collapsing marriage, his failed attempts at quitting, his spiritual awakening. The strange and profound sense that something beyond him had reached out and lifted him out of the abyss. Not religion, necessarily, but something higher, something other. For the first time in years, the doctor doesn't feel judged. He feels understood. When the conversation ends, he knows something's changed. Neither of them knows it yet, but history has just pivoted, quietly, without ceremony. From this kitchen table, conversation will come a movement, not driven by profit or fame, but by the simple act of one alcoholic helping another. William Griffith Wilson was born in a small room above a bar on November 26, 1895, in East Dorset, a town so small it barely made a mark on the map. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, your parents' business, and whether or not you show up to church on Sunday. His family ran a hotel, the Mount Aeolus Inn, a once busy stopover for travellers coming through the Green Mountains. As a child, Bill would stare down from the upper floor windows and watch the carriages come and go. He was fascinated by motion, wheels turning, lives passing, change. Anything that hinted at escape. But escape wasn't easy. His home life began to unravel early. His father, a restless man with dreams bigger than his follow-through, abandoned the family when Bill was just 11. Not long after, his mother, a fiercely intelligent woman trained in osteopathic medicine, left as well, moving to Boston to pursue her career. She took his younger sister with her. Bill was left behind, handed over to his stern, emotionally distant grandparents. It was a betrayal he never fully recovered from. A quiet shame bloomed in his chest, the kind of shame that burrows deep, the kind that can't be explained in words. He grew up tall and gangly, always feeling like an outsider. His schoolmates mocked his tremors, possibly an early sign of a neurological disorder. But Bill had a mind like a scalpel. He devoured books on philosophy and war, becoming obsessed with stories of courage and strategy. He read Thomas Carlyle, Plato, and Nietzsche while still in high school, and he dreamed of greatness, not the kind you find in a report card, but the kind that left a mark on the world. Music was his refuge, especially the violin, and so was building things. At 16, he constructed his own boomerang. At 17, he built a working radio transmitter and made contact with someone across the country. His teachers whispered about how brilliant he was, but also how lost. He fell in love for the first time as a teenager, painfully, completely, And when the relationship ended, he spiraled. Not just emotionally, he collapsed physically, crippled by what doctors called a nervous breakdown. Some say it was grief. Others say it was the first visible sign of depression, which would shadow him for much of his adult life. And then came war. In 1917, with the United States entering World War I, Bill enlisted. He trained at Norwich University, a military college in Vermont, and was soon commissioned as a second lieutenant. He never saw combat, but the military gave him structure, purpose, and most importantly, camaraderie. It also gave him something else, his first real drink. At an officer's dinner party, he was handed a glass of beer. One glass turned into 2, then 3. He later said, "I had found the elixir of life. For the first time, I belonged." That night, the awkward boy vanished. In his place stood a man who could laugh, talk, dance, and charm. He felt invincible. He didn't know it yet, but that first drink would echo through the rest of his life. The war ended, but the battles inside Bill Wilson were only just beginning. He returned to civilian life like so many young men of his generation. Ambitious, restless, uncertain. He married his childhood sweetheart, Lois Burnham, in 1918. She was everything he wasn't. Grounded, patient, emotionally steady. She believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself, and he needed that, desperately. The two of them lived in New York, scraping by while Bill studied law at Brooklyn Law School, but he didn't last long there. The classroom bored him. The idea of becoming another face in a courtroom felt like failure. He wanted more, so he dropped out, and once again began chasing something bigger. He found his way into Wall Street, just before the boom of the Roaring Twenties, a golden era of champagne, jazz, and speculation. It was a gambler's paradise, and Bill had the perfect temperament for it. Obsessive, charming, persuasive. He became a stock analyst and a market researcher, bouncing between firms and picking up clients on charisma alone. People trusted him, his intelligence, his hunger, his belief in the future. And for a while, he was right. The money flowed, so did the invitations, and so did the drinks. He called it research, joking that whiskey and gin helped him win deals. But the truth was darker. He couldn't stop, not for a night, not for a week. The man who once built radios in his attic now couldn't walk past a bar without going inside, couldn't go to dinner without blacking out by dessert. And yet, outwardly, he held it together. He was still winning accounts, still charming clients, still attending parties with Lois on his arm. But privately, the cracks were deepening. There were hospital stays, moments of humiliation, being dragged out of restaurants, kicked out of hotel lobbies, waking up on park benches in clothes stained with rain and shame. He would promise Lois never again. He tried every method he could find to control his drinking. Drinking only beer, switching to wine, drinking only with food, drinking only after 5 p.m. Nothing worked. The more he failed, the more his shame grew, and the more he drank to kill that shame. By the early 1930s, he was unemployable. Brokers whispered about his unreliability. Friends stopped inviting him out. His savings vanished. Lois took odd jobs to keep the lights on. Still, she stayed. She locked the liquor cabinet. She poured bottles down the sink. At one point, he started hiding full bottles in the toilet tank so he could sneak sips when she thought he was just using the bathroom. He landed in Towns Hospital, not once but 4 times, a private institution in New York that specialized in alcoholics. The doctors there had seen men like him before, men with good hearts, good minds, but a disease they couldn't name and couldn't treat. On his last visit, a specialist, Dr. William Silkworth, gave him a diagnosis. You have an allergy of the body and an obsession of the mind. He told Bill, gently, that unless something changed, he was likely to die. And Bill believed him. But it wasn't enough to stop. Not yet. By the winter of 1934, Bill Wilson was a shadow. His eyes were sunken, his body thin and trembling. His hands shook so badly he could barely light a cigarette. The once promising stockbroker, the clever boy from Vermont, the man who'd once dreamed of changing the world, now couldn't manage a single day without a drink. His world had shrunk to a grim cycle: drink, blackout, regret, repeat. Lois, still unwavering, brought him back once again to Town's hospital. It was his fourth stay. Everyone, even the kind-hearted Dr. Silkworth, was beginning to give up hope. But this time something was different. A visitor came to see him, a former drinking buddy, a man named Ebby Thatcher. Bill had known Ebby as a fellow hopeless case, the kind of drinker who got thrown out of boarding houses and lost jobs before noon. Yet here he was, clean and sober, calm, clear-eyed. Bill was baffled. How? Ebby said simply, "I've found religion. Not church necessarily, but something spiritual, a fellowship, the Oxford group, a Christian movement that emphasised honesty, surrender, making amends, and helping others." Bill bristled. He didn't want to hear about God. Not now, not after everything. But Ebby didn't push. He just told his story and said that he'd found peace, real peace. Bill listened, and something in him stirred. A few days later, alone in his hospital room, Bill hit a wall, spiritually, emotionally, physically. He lay shaking in bed, gripped by terror and despair. He believed deep down that this was it, that he'd never escape, that he was beyond saving. In that moment of total defeat, something strange happened. He cried out, not in prayer, not in ritual, just in agony. "If there is a God, let him show himself. I am ready to do anything." And then silence, and then light. Bill would later describe it as a white glow that filled the room, an overwhelming sense of presence. Peace washed over him. The terror vanished. The craving vanished. The shame, gone. Dr. Silkworth called it a conversion experience, a psychological shift so deep it rewired the man. And to Bill, who had tried everything else, it felt like a miracle. He walked out of Town's hospital a free man, and he never drank again. After his spiritual awakening at Town's hospital, Bill Wilson was sober, but not safe. The obsession to drink had lifted, yes, but something deeper gnawed at him, a kind of restlessness, a question. Now what? He'd found freedom, but it felt fragile. He sensed that if he just went back to ordinary life, the old patterns might come crawling back. He needed a purpose, a way to keep what he had found alive, and then a phrase echoed in his mind. Something Dr. Silkworth had once told him. You have to pass it on, you have to help another alcoholic, or you won't stay sober yourself. So he began trying. At first without success. He went into hospitals, talked to patients, shared his story, and most of them listened politely, then went back to drinking. But Bill kept going. It wasn't about saving others. Not yet. It was about saving himself. And in May of 1935, a business trip took him to Akron, Ohio. The trip was a failure. The deal fell through. Alone in his hotel room, the bar downstairs seemed to whisper his name. The smell of whiskey, the clink of glasses, the promise of escape. He stood at a crossroads. Temptation on one side, a telephone on the other. He chose the phone. Bill rang local churches, asked if they knew anyone who might need help. One woman, Henrietta Seiberling, a member of the Oxford group, said yes. She knew a man, a doctor, brilliant, respected, utterly enslaved by alcohol. And so, on a warm afternoon in June 1935, Bill walked into a tidy home on Ardmore Avenue and met Dr. Robert Holbrook Smith, a surgeon from Akron, known to friends as Dr. Bob. The doctor didn't want to talk. He was courteous but guarded, slightly embarrassed. He'd heard enough sermons in his time. He'd tried prayer, willpower, medicine, hypnosis, and even moving states to escape the bottle. Nothing had worked. Why should this strange visitor from New York be any different? But Bill didn't offer advice. He didn't diagnose. He didn't tell Bob what to do. He simply told his story, his shame, his helplessness, his countless failures, and the peace that followed. Something cracked open in Bob. Here was someone who understood, someone who spoke the same language, the language of addiction, fear, and loneliness. The two men ended up talking for 6 hours. Dr. Bob didn't get sober that day, but he saw a way out for the first time. A few weeks later, after a final binge and a detox so rough he could barely speak, Bill sat by his bedside, holding his hand, talking him through the shakes. Bob surrendered, and on June the 10th, 1935, he took his last drink. That date is now considered the official birth of Alcoholics Anonymous. At first there was no name, no organisation, no books, just two men, one helping the other. But it worked. That was the miracle. They began seeking out more alcoholics, visiting hospitals, sitting at kitchen tables, sharing their experience and hope, one person at a time, and soon the message spread, not through lectures or campaigns, but through something much older and more powerful, one soul telling the truth to another. By 1937, 2 years after that long conversation in Akron, something was becoming clear. This thing, whatever it was, worked. Not just for Bill, not just for Dr. Bob, but for dozens of others. Men and women who had once been hopeless drunks were staying sober, some for months, even years. And not just white-knuckling it either. They were laughing again, rebuilding lives, mending marriages, making amends. Something real was happening, but it was fragile. There was no structure, no written record, just stories passed by word of mouth. They worried it might fade, be lost or misinterpreted. And so the group, still small, still informal, decided they needed to write a book that told the truth, what it had been like, what had happened, and what they were doing now to stay sober, day after day. Bill volunteered to write it. He holed up in a tiny office in New York City, sometimes writing at his kitchen table, other times pacing the floor, while Lois read over his shoulder. And in that time, he wrote the heart of Alcoholics Anonymous, the big book. The book included stories, testimonials, medical insight, but most importantly, it included a clear plan of action, something Bill had never found in any religious pamphlet or treatment centre. He called it the 12 Steps, and they went like this. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable, no more pretending, no more white lies. Step 1 is brutal honesty. I can't do this alone. A letting go. A hard look in the mirror. Every resentment, every wrong. No corners left dark. Secrets lose their power when spoken aloud, especially to someone who understands. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. The full circle. Helping others as we were helped. Healing forward. It wasn't just a recovery plan, it was a spiritual scaffolding, a path for the broken-hearted, whether they called it God, the universe, or nothing at all. When the big book was published in 1939, it sold slowly at first, but word spread. Letters came in, meetings began to pop up in New York, Ohio, Los Angeles, Canada. Then came prisons, hospitals, churches, community halls. Alcoholics who had never met Bill or Bob were now following the steps and staying sober. And Alcoholics Anonymous became a lifeline. The big book was never advertised on billboards. There were no slick marketing campaigns, no PR machine, and yet it spread quietly, steadily, like light passed from candle to candle. In 1941, the turning point came. The Saturday Evening Post, one of the most read magazines in America, published an article about Alcoholics Anonymous. The response was immediate. Letters poured in from across the country, from desperate drinkers, worried families, prison chaplains, doctors. Where can I find a meeting? Can I get the book? Local chapters sprang up almost overnight. New York, Chicago, Dallas, London, Toronto, Tokyo, Johannesburg. No advertising budget, no central command, just people helping people. The simplicity of it was the secret. No hierarchy, no preachers, no fees, no pressure, just rooms, often dusty and cold, filled with mismatched chairs, bad coffee, and honest conversation. For the first time in history, alcoholics, a group once written off as moral failures, had a place to go where they were not judged, not fixed, not shamed, just heard. My name is, and I'm an alcoholic. That admission, once whispered in shame, became a door to freedom. Bill Wilson never wanted to be a saint, and he certainly never claimed to be one. In fact, he spent much of his later life pushing back against people who tried to put him on a pedestal. I'm just another drunk who got lucky, he'd say. He remained involved with AA into the 1960s, writing, speaking, quietly guiding the movement from behind the scenes. But he also wrestled with depression, doubt, and the human messiness of a life lived in the spotlight. He was a complicated man, sincere and flawed, visionary and stubborn. But he never stopped believing in the power of one alcoholic helping another. Not through force, but through shared pain, shared hope, and above all, humility. On January the 24th, 1971, Bill Wilson died in Miami, Florida, at the age of 75. His last words to Lois were simple and loving, and as per his wishes, there was no grand funeral. No monuments, no statues, just a quiet burial in East Dorset, Vermont, the same village where he was born, a few miles from the old inn and the old stone church. Today, the legacy of AA lives on in over 180 countries with millions of members. Meetings happen in churches, hospitals, community centres, on cruise ships, on military bases, and even inside prisons. And the format hasn't changed much. A chair, a coffee pot, a circle of people, and the quiet, radical act of telling the truth out loud. Somewhere tonight, right now, a man or woman will walk into their first AA meeting, shaking, scared, lost, and someone will look them in the eye and say, "You're not alone, we've been waiting for you." And that, more than any book, any theory, any tribute, is Bill Wilson's real legacy. He helped crack open a door, and the world walked through it.